So it's my pleasure this evening to share with you how we think it is important to work together as we try to establish greater consumer demand, more effective marketing for the beef industry. Some of you have heard me talk before about the words of W. Edwards Deming, who was an American but worked all over the world. He was actually a statistician. And something that he said that I've always remembered is that best efforts will not substitute for knowledge. And I believe that is an important message for the relationship that we've established over over 2 decades now with INIA. And then in addition to that, he said that if you improve quality, you automatically improve productivity. That too is something that I believe our collaboration will achieve as we work together to help assist the beef industry. I'm going to use some data from the United States to start my presentation to show you that, and these only go through the year 2016, but they show you very clear patterns in what has happened for demand of various meat and poultry products. Demand for pork has remained relatively constant, but demand for beef has declined while the demand for chicken has increased. And so chicken has outcompeted beef in the market between the years 1970 and 2016. In the United States, and this is probably also true in many locations around the world, when we look at total beef demand, that demand has declined by anywhere from almost 10% to as much as 39%, depending on the type of product that is being merchandised at retail. So total beef has been reduced by 39% between 1985 and the year 2014. So the question becomes is what is the ties between the country of Uruguay and our efforts in the United States to improve demand factors for beef? And what is the importance of the relationship between Colorado State University and INIA? Well, our efforts to begin to do things together actually started in the year 2000, when we first made a trip to Uruguay with a good friend, Daniel de Matos, to discuss what things could we do to help improve demand for the product. During that trip, we visited several packing entities that are still there today, as far as I know, but perhaps named differently, including the plant at Taicarambo and Paysandu and Canelones. As we toured these facilities, we began the process of learning more about features that were similar and features that were different in the beef production systems between Uruguay and the United States. Interestingly enough, we learned that in some cases we had similar issues that we were facing that were probably costing the industry a significant amount of money, including things like horns on cattle, which result in bruising that looks like that. Musculature problems that result in reduced yields associated with the beef products. Problems associated with byproduct values because of condemnations associated with zoonosis and parasites. Similarly in this picture, similarly in this picture with the omesums, and then problems associated with, again, the musculature. One of the problems that Uruguay faced substantial numbers of was dark cutting carcasses. At the time, a significant number of the beef cattle harvested in Uruguay became dark cutters because of pre-slaughter stress. And then maturity, because it was taking a much longer period of time to complete the finishing process for cattle in Uruguay. And so we worked together to initiate what we called an estimate of lost opportunities at that point in time, which resulted in this list of factors that were actually costing the industry money. So when you create a quality defect in a production system, that quality defect ends up either costing the product sale, or it ends up costing because of lost opportunity for sale in the production chain. That effort led us to our first, what we referred to as the Uruguay Beef Quality Survey. The idea being to model that project after a project that was conducted similarly in the United States, that we call here the National Beef Quality Audit. And we essentially listed some specific objectives for that project to result in. The idea was to essentially assess via face-to-face interviews and assessments of the plants the current quality challenges that were faced by the Uruguayan beef industry. We tried to characterize and quantify the quality challenges that were being faced by the Uruguayan beef industry. The idea here being that you cannot manage what you don't measure. And so this was the first effort to measure quality losses that existed in Uruguay beef industry. And then lastly, to conduct a strategy workshop to figure out what do we do next as a consequence of knowing something now about the quality losses that the industry was facing. These cattle represent two different types in the United States. The picture on the left was a champion steer at the San Antonio Livestock Show in Texas in 1958. And you can see that the type of cattle produced in the 1950s were much different than the type of cattle produced in 2019 in the United States. And I'm certain that this has resulted in similar changes in Uruguay over that period of time. The reason for that is something that Dr. Deming said. He said, Deming's main points are to control quality at every production step. The idea is to control every input, every step in the process with an eye to making sure nothing is wasted, nothing is wrong, so that the final product is consistent, predictable, and reliable. Quite often in a supply chain where you have independent components of the supply, it's very easy for people to make the responsibility for producing product of high quality somebody else's job. And so we have a saying that if it's not my job, then whose is it? And in the US industry, we've tried to do a better job of communicating with all of our producers that, well, in part, it's their job to produce quality that results in high demand for beef. In Uruguay, starting in 2000. There's now been 3 separate quality audits conducted. The first was in 2003 that I mentioned. The second was in 2008. And the third was in 2013. One of the things that we know is that the Uruguayan beef production system is a little different than that in the United States. Most of the cattle are raised on grass, free range without confinement systems. The climate is a bit different, which allows that to occur. But because it's based on pastures, it gives Uruguayans an opportunity to manage the pastures so that you can intensively graze native and legume-based forage systems. There's mixed grazing of cattle and sheep in Uruguay. These numbers may be a bit different now, but at the time it was about 1-to-1 ratio. There was very low use of growth hormones or any growth promoting compounds in the Uruguayan system. The cattle stock was about 11.7 million pounds, and the annual slaughter was about 1.8 million. In 2003, almost all the cattle had some form of Hereford genetics or were Hereford Angus. Over 50% of the herd was Hereford. 88% of the animals had 1 or 2 hot iron brands, which reduces the value of the hides. And there was about 4.5% hide damage in the production system. In 2008, that same was true, although beginning to see changes. The Herefords were still 46% of the production system, but now you started to see other breeds showing up as components to the production system. And I think particularly you start to see the use of crossbreeding to produce hybrid vigor in the system. By 2013, Herefords comprised only 39% of the Uruguayan population, whereas Angus and other breeds have begun to be used more efficiently or more frequently in the production system. Talk about carcasses produced. In 2003, Uruguayan steers weighed about 597, and my numbers are in pounds. I apologize for that. On a USDA classification basis, only about 6.2% of the carcasses were equivalent in grade to the USDA choice grade. Also noteworthy were that 49% were either standard, and then 23% were either utility or canner. So a large proportion of the population at the time was very mature carcasses, or carcasses that resulted from older cattle. By 2008, you can see that that number was beginning to increase for steers up to 13.5% that would have graded choice. And the numbers of utility, commercial, and cutter carcasses, as well as select carcasses, had begun to decline. If you can contrast marbling scores across all 3 of the audits, you can see that the number of carcasses grading with traces, which is a lower marbling score, has declined, while the number of carcasses having slight or small or modest marbling, which is the SL, SM, and MT categories has increased over the period of time that these audits have been conducted. In my mind, this means that as a consequence of measuring the things that Uruguay wants to improve on, one of those things being marbling scores, because marbling scores improve eating quality, you've clearly had an impact on your production system and have improved, on average, the average eating quality of the Uruguayan beef cattle population. This is good news. And in my view, this is a direct consequence of the collaboration that has existed between CSU and INIA. We have similar data, as I mentioned, that we collect in the United States. I don't want to share those data entirely with you today for the sake of time, but I do want to show you a few things that we're now doing differently. As analytical techniques become more available to us, we're able to do things in a more measurable fashion using these techniques than we have in the past. The quality factors of greatest interest to us in the US beef industry are these buckets, I call them, that are listed here. And in the US, there's 7 of those. Because we can now use analytical techniques to actually measure progress in these 7 buckets, even across differing sectors of the beef chain, we can now measure how good a job we're doing relative to meeting requirements by our consumers or by buyers at various sectors of the production chain that must have those characteristics before they will make the purchase decision. So on the slide, if you just look at the top row, for the trait, how and where cattle were raised, for packers to make a decision, they must know that information before they will buy cattle about 31% of the time. And if we measure this over time, so in an audit in 2011, and an audit in 2016, and in an audit that we're just starting right now, we can tell over time whether we're doing a better job or a worse job of hitting those targets. We're working with INIA to integrate similar measurement factors into the next audit they'll be conducted in Uruguay. This is a similar slide demonstrating willingness to pay a premium when the cattle have these characteristics at each sector of the industry. One thing you'll notice is that food safety between the 1990s and now became much more important. And not only are packers requiring food safety in this slide, but they're also willing to pay more for it. Eating satisfaction also is extremely important. And you can see that in terms of relative importance, the most important thing across all sectors of the industry is food safety, followed immediately in most sectors by the eating satisfaction associated with the product. So the product eating quality still is very, very important to the successful creation of demand for beef. These are the quality challenges that we've identified when we began our first audit in 1991, across time, about every 5 years, until the last that was conducted in 2016. And you can see that the things that are of consequence from a quality perspective have changed over that period of time. And the reason that they have changed is because as we made the measurement to find out what things we needed to improve, we addressed those in our production system, and new things that we identified, the next audit took their place. And so over time, we've adopted a philosophy of continual improvement to make the product better and create more demand for beef. We also, just like in Uruguay, measure carcasses in the plants to determine what the carcass consist looks like. And from those measurements, we know in the United States that our carcasses are getting too large. The average weight for a carcass that is just from fed cattle, so not from mature cattle, is over 860 pounds, or about 400 kilos, 420 kilos. And it continues to increase. There's many factors that influence beef eating quality, and I've shown you that one of the demand drivers for beef is its eating quality. And so by selection and by management, we need to try as an industry to maximize the expression of these characteristics in the cattle supply chain so that we maximize the demand for the product. By selecting for cattle that have increased their marbling scores over time, you can see that between 1996 and 2018, we've been able to improve dramatically the percentage of the US population that grades choice or prime. Same is true for the population in Uruguay, as I've already identified. So that must be an important demand driver, because the economic signal to produce this is being sent back to the producers and the people that generate genetics. These are the categories we believe we need to continue to focus on. And you'll notice that one of the big three things is eating quality and reduction of variety. We need to improve the consistency of our product as it's presented to retail. So I took a moment to list things I think that we have accomplished in our partnership with INIA since the year 2000, when we first visited Uruguay. We've conducted 3 beef and lamb quality audits. We've co-hosted many educational seminars, including one that I really miss, which is also listed here, is Campo del Plato, which was conducted in Montevideo for many years. We've exchanged students in graduate school for INIA personnel. I know that Santiago Lizardo and Pablo are listening, and they both completed PhD degrees at Colorado State University, and what I think was an excellent exchange of both culture and scientific knowledge. We've completed 2 instrument grading studies together, which I didn't have time to talk about. We presented at least 6 presentations that I know of at Campo del Plato when it was occurring. We allowed Dr. Montosi to visit the United States and spend a year with us in the year 2011. We miss Fabio and his family, sometimes his family more than Fabio. And then we've conducted a couple different short courses together, and we worked together to make presentations at the World Angus Secretariat meeting in Punta del Este just last year. I think that the results of our memorandum of understanding have been very fruitful. It's been a tremendous collaborative effort, and now we're looking forward to extending this relationship into the next dimension of what will be possible between our 2 organizations. And now I would like to take a second and introduce my colleague, Dr. Brad Morgan. Dr. Morgan joined the CSU faculty about a little over a year ago, but he is a well-known internationally meat scientist. And I think you're going to enjoy his discussion about things we can now begin to think about doing in the supply chain to improve the quality and the eating satisfaction associated with beef. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, oh, en español. Muchas gracias, profesor Belk. Realmente disfrutamos de su presentación. Tanto en lo conceptual, como también en el contenido de lo logrado durante todo este tiempo y cómo a través de la experiencia logramos capturar muchas capacidades dentro de Uruguay, teniéndolos a ustedes como mentores.